your attention, please. We come to our last session of day 1. Manufacturing consent in the time of Facebook. N. Ram in conversation with Samira Khan.
In the newspaper group, as well as an author of a few political books. The most recent of one which came out last year called Why Scams Are Here to Stay, Understanding Political Corruption in India. This session has been titled Manufacturing Consent in the Time of Facebook. And the format I want to take it at is, I'm just a facilitator of this conversation, and I will sort of pose a few questions and open the house to you all to ask questions. It'd be probably more pertinent, it'd be more reframed that rather to say manufacturing consent at the time of Facebook to manufacturing consent at the time of Twitter, because those of us who use social media know that sort of Facebook is pretty dead now, and it's really some of the most engaging discussions are happening on Twitter or increasingly Instagram, and so often, of course, WhatsApp dominates all our lives. And what we hope to discuss today is the state of the media and the challenges posed to it, particularly by social media. Discussion and dissension is critical to a vibrant democracy, and the role of journalism and the media has been that to bring in that critical voice and to democracy. A journalism professor of mine, P. Sainath, when he was teaching class many years ago, talked about that good journalism, the hallmark of good journalism, is that it's relevant to the times it is practiced in. And there was a time when mainstream media in this country set the agenda. And what you read in your morning newspaper is what you discussed over breakfast and probably the rest of the day. It looks like increasingly, now it feels like at least, that Twitter is setting the agenda for television, and then television is sort of setting the agenda for print media. And which brings me to my first question, saying, how do you, in this scenario where social media increasingly seems to be setting this agenda, what are the challenges to mainstream media? How do we sort of then address that?
I don't know in what sense you can say the social media is setting the agenda. That's a very large question, but certainly the technology giants, they love to call themselves technology companies and not media companies. They are very powerful. They are dominant in the media ecosystem and in the social sphere. Just to give you an example, I don't think Facebook is dead, far from it. Facebook is going to be around for a long time. It has more than 2 billion users globally. And in India, it's well over 200 million. In fact, India, the number of India tops the list of countries with the most Facebook users. And then Google and YouTube, WhatsApp, the messaging apps, apart from Twitter, of course, Twitter. So together, Alphabet, which is the parent company of Facebook, Google and Amazon absolutely dominate this space. Just to give you one statistic, it's estimated that total digital advertising on digital platforms is a little over $170 billion, US dollars, of which 2/3 go to just two players. In this order, Google, that is Alphabet, and then followed by Facebook. And newspapers, although we are very proud of the fact that we are read more than ever before and around the world, we get about 5 to 6% of total digital ad spend. And recent data show that new advertising spend, 90% of new ad spend goes to Google and Facebook, mainly Google, but also Facebook. As for what they actually do, the toxic effects have been very prominent in recent times. I think earlier there was a romantic approach or notion of social media. I think it's still there, sharing and putting out good things, solidarity, putting out messages. But unfortunately, most people feel today, most scholars and others who are familiar with this subject, feel that the negative effects overwhelmingly dominate this. It's very toxic, it's fake news. Today, another form of censorship is to do it through speech, unrestricted speech, false news, toxic messages exert tremendous pressure on writers, on journalists, on the news media as a whole. So I think that's where we are. Do they set the agenda? Not necessarily. But if somebody else sets the agenda, they magnify it, they amplify the message. And people speak about the filter bubbles they create for every individual user. So I think that's really the concern today. What is the purpose of journalism? What is journalism? Already journalism it wasn't clear that there was any common definition of journalism, because you had the tabloids, you had the qualities, you had the Sun and News of the World, you have Fox News, and you have the better channels. And in India also you have NDTV and you have Republic. So it was already there. It's not just this, but this has amplified it, scaled it up in a way that has caused tremendous chaos and confusion. That's how I see it. By the way, for those who haven't read the book, the term manufacturing consent comes from a phrase used by Walter Lippmann, the great American commentator, and then picked up by Noam Chomsky, and that's why I brought the book to show people, because it's often forgotten, but this is the classic propaganda model which Ed Herman and Chomsky developed to show that, mainly the US press, when it comes to key foreign policy issues, they appear to be diverse, they appear to be very liberal, very disputatious, but they are framed by the elite within a certain propaganda model, and then they work out how this propaganda model works, how it's constructed and how it works, the filters and so on. So anyway, that's just to explain the title of this, whoever gave the title.
I'm going to sort of jump in still and sort of play more devil's advocate on this. To dismiss of social media only in terms of negative influence, and I know a lot of young people here probably are more on that, but the fact that just to dismiss it off and say still the agenda will be set by mainstream media, we don't see it happening. And a lot of readers and viewers don't have that faith which they did in mainstream media in this country. They feel it's been trapped by political interests, by corporate interests. NDTV you talk about, NDTV has a huge stake, Ambani has a huge stake in Mukesh Ambani. Most other of the channels are controlled, and their agendas and their news continues to be filtered by that. So we now have enough information about all these channels which we take as sacred cows, that we won't touch these ones, that they're very compromised in many ways. So how do you sort of, in that sense, when, this whole sort of thing, how would you answer to that fact that people have sort of lost faith that the way mainstream media once portrayed their issues, it's not sort of putting forth the issues of the day. I mean, whether they can't speak because of political interests or they can't speak because of corporate interests, but you somehow feel that you find your voice through social media or some digital platform. And so, we can't sort of dismiss them all off. People who are finding more communities, they can, particularly marginalized people, often are finding groups online or having their voices heard there, because the mainstream is not really doing a good job of that.
First, let me clarify. I didn't want to bracket NDTV and Republic. NDTV has a lot more credibility than Republic, whatever its problems. But on the larger question of trust, yes, there are lots of studies showing that in most developed countries, certainly in the US and UK, trust in the mainstream media has plummeted. It's been going down for a long time. We don't have such data for India, but my impression is I think it's not as bad as that yet, although we could be getting there. So in a situation where trust is in decline, is very low in the sources of what you would like to regard as worthwhile news, serious news, but what people should know about the world and your country and your community, I think this is a distressing phenomenon. But what needs to be understood is why this has happened. Why is it that Facebook, is it motiveless malignity that Facebook is up to, or Google, YouTube, for example? There are also good things, but I'm talking about the toxic effects. Research has shown it's the advertising business model that's at the bottom of it. What is it? What do we mean by this? What advertisers want is attention. The idea is to capture attention and monopolize that hold over attention, people's attention. The consumers, the word used there is consumer. consumers' attention. And once you capture it, personalize it, they'll know who you are, whether you are in a relationship, many other personal details. And if you can sell that to advertisers, using technology of a kind that we don't have, the mainstream media, the algorithms, the bots and so on, then I think it becomes uncontrollable. It spins out of control. And nobody else can compete in this environment, which is why I think Facebook has got into a lot of trouble, because the immediate issue was the alleged Russian interference in the 2016 US election, presidential election. But it's much more than that. In India, we have our own scandals. Cambridge Analytica got hold of the personal data of at least, I read, 560,000 Indians. And this is being sold to political consultants who work for parties ahead of elections. As for WhatsApp, India has, I think, more than, it's a very large number of WhatsApp users, one of the highest in the world. And the government is, on the one hand, worried that WhatsApp will go out of control. They want to be able to track the origin of messages and track the details. So the person who sends it, WhatsApp says no, because there's end-to-end encryption and we cannot reveal that. That will cut into the model itself. So I think you have these problems. But what is unacceptable today, and that's the point that I think has to be highlighted, is the defense by Facebook and the rest that we are not responsible for what third parties are up to on our platforms. We are not media companies. We do not provide, we do not create content. We are carriers. And this is often, they've got away with it in the past. There's no liability. But today, the demands to regulate these internet giants, these so-called technology companies, I think that demand has to be met. And if you don't get this right, too much regulation is also going to create problems, because it goes to the state, and you don't want them spying on it. In fact, some surveys in the US showed that Americans would rather have the whole thing free than get the government to regulating it. And the same thing applies to India. I read that in Uttar Pradesh, the district magistrate, I think Lalitpur district, they've issued orders, notifications to all the journalists that, so far as WhatsApp groups for journalists is concerned, the administrator has to register, and every member of that group has to register with the district administration. Completely illegal, but that's the other end of the problem. So how do you strike a balance? On the one hand, you all want every one of you from the school, you have a WhatsApp, you use WhatsApp, you have a Facebook account, right? But what do you do with it is the question. The same thing applies to all of us, journalists and others, writers. Some people just don't go there at all. I know writers who studiously avoid the social media completely. One is my friend Gideon Haigh, a well-known writer in Australia, a leading cricket writer. He doesn't have a Twitter account. He's not on Facebook. He doesn't use WhatsApp, and so on. So that's one way of protecting yourself. But then you will probably miss out quite a lot.
Yeah, but most journalists today, I mean, working for any mainstream media, are encouraged by their media organizations to have very active Twitter accounts and very active social presence to distribute that news which is published in the mainstream. So you're encouraged, in fact, to have an official account, which you're required to have that. No, so that's interesting. So you said, how do we regulate? We don't want to go to the regulate information and come back. We're investing very little in news gathering. What we're really creating is a band of journalists who sit in their armchairs or Marathon News and pontificate and give opinions on things they haven't done any legwork on, or their colleagues have. So why have we been seem to be cutting news gathering budgets, pushing more opinion than actual real reportage, and then of course we're saying now these are the enemies to social media, when we ourselves need to clean up our house, figure out what our strengths are. People once trusted us, we had room to negotiate, we were the voice of the people. Why have we given up that space to them?
It's not yet happened here in the way it could in India. It's happened in developed countries. It's happened in the United States. Newspapers have collapsed, but they've also cut down on bureaus. They don't have foreign correspondents of the kind they have. There are exceptions like the New York Times, but There are fewer, I think I read that there are fewer journalists working in US newspapers today than there were in the 1970s. And it's not that productivity has increased in any significant way. So I think this is a real problem. Reporting is often taking a backseat. Investigative journalism, media organizations are not willing to finance them because there's no guarantee it will succeed. I've had some experience in this area. You've got to invest time, you've got to invest money, you've got to be prepared for failure. You want to investigate something, you reach a dead end. These are problems. So media organizations need to invest and take this risk, if you like, a chance that you're going to strike gold at some point. You could, provided the subject is of some relevance and value or of the public interest. So investigative journalism is certainly taken a decline. I think since I can recall that in my own experience since the 80s in India, there have been very few. We did Bofors, and then Tehelka did things, and others. Indian Express did some very fine investigative stories earlier. Sainath himself, you have referred to, has done very good investigative work on farmers' suicides, on rural distress, on starvation deaths, things like that. But today, I think we haven't reached the lowest point in this. It's declining. Because why? Because the guys who are running media organizations are those with management degrees. Nothing wrong with it, on the one. But they also, there's no clear demarcation between the editorial functions and the business functions. Well, earlier you used to talk about a wall, the Chinese wall, if you like, that was given up.
No, I remember as journalists, you would never encourage reporters to ever meet anyone on the advertising side. It was a big no-no. And then, of course, they started having training workshops with you to understand the other side.
And provide evidence. The word infested was used in the previous session. It's infested with commercial interventions all the time. No media organization can claim to be exempt, including ours. We have an editorial, a code of editorial values which says that there's a clear line between editorial functionings and business activities, but the idea of a wall no longer holds. That you've got to have a conversation, but some kind of line. When there's a recession, the line is pushed down. You accept more, you make more concessions to the business guys because they say, you won't have any journalists, you won't have any reporters unless we do well. But there's a process of negotiation, but there is a demarcation, there is a distinction that has to be drawn. And this also leads us to the proposition that you must make a distinction between the state of the news industry and the state and quality of journalism. Very often these two things get conflated. When tremendous confusion arises because we're talking, oh, this newspaper is doing very well. Fox News is making a lot of money, and Sky in the UK, and so on. The Sun makes a lot of money from Murdoch, but is it good journalism? They are related, but they are separate. They are separate.
And anyone can post text, anyone can put messages, or anyone can write a story, so everyone thinks they're a journalist. And I teach journalism, and I find everybody thinks they're already journalists before they've even been trained, and they say that I can bend to any topic I want, I can opinion anything I want. Then what's the difference then between a professional journalist versus everyone else who claims to be also journalists? Because they're dealing with information, they're dealing with images, whatever. So what's the role then of a professional journalist, and what kind of training do we need for these journalists in the future?
This is an age-old question because journalism, well, let me go back. The definition of a profession is there are accepted standards. There's certification, there's accountability and so on. But journalism is not a profession in this sense. Although increasingly people go to J schools if they want to be a journalist. Not necessarily, but increasingly. There are professional codes and standards, values, there are books, textbooks and other books on this subject. And certainly a view, I think particularly advocated by Walter Lippmann, that professionalism as a sort of antidote is to propaganda. In fact, Lippmann did a lot on propaganda in the US press in the early years. And he thought raising professional standards would meet that, and I think that turned out to be not the case at all. Professionalism does not protect you against these huge forces that erode the values of journalism. I'd also like to say you need a framework. And my framework for journalism is as follows roughly. You need a conceptual framework. Whether you call it a theoretical framework or